everyone, and welcome to my complete gearing guide for Battle for Azeroth. Now, we've already covered the basics, but the end game of BFA is only really kicking off right now with PvP, Warfronts, and raids beginning to release. So, today I'm going to be covering how you can gear up, as well as the fastest possible way to gear up, plus a few tips and tricks to help you out along the way. Now, you're here to gear up your character in-game. Well, what about you gear up your brain in real life? And that's where today's sponsor, Skillshare, comes in. So they're an online learning community with courses covering a massive range of topics: design, business, tech, including some things that I use every day, like camera operation, video editing, writing, running a business. Their premium membership only costs $10 a month, and it gives you unlimited access to content taught by experts in the field. And the first 500 people who sign up with my link get their first 2 months for free. Now, I just finished watching Real Productivity Create Your Ideal Week, which is a course by the CEO of Skillshare. Yeah, the company CEO going through how he organizes himself to get stuff done. Really interesting. So, equip yourself with knowledge by following my link below, and thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Okay, so if you've just dinged, then things are pretty similar, but just a little bit faster than they were previously. The fastest course of action for a solo player is to queue for normal dungeons and quickly get up to item level 305. 305, of course, is our first goal because it gets us into heroic dungeons, which of course drop 325 gear. Now, while this is going on, then you just want to be clearing world quests, and you want to keep in mind that world quest rewards scale based on your item level, so generally you kind of want to clear them last if you can help it, and perhaps bump their item level up a bit before you clear them. Now, you'll be honored with one faction from leveling, so head to their emissary vendor and pick up a 320 cloak to get you started. Now, if you've got a lot of gold, then picking up your Dark Moon trinket is a decent idea if it's really good for your spec, but bear in mind that it probably will be very expensive. Now, there are other BOE world drop bits of gear. They can be high item level, but once again, only if you've got a lot of money. And then the same, of course, goes for any raid BOEs. Now, that said, if you're watching this video a few months down the line, then a lot of the lower end BOEs will be a good bit more affordable. Now, the major addition to early game leveling is, of course, Mythic plus Dungeons. Then we also have Warfronts and Uldir LFR. So Uldir LFR Wing 1 opens up on the 11th of September, and it's got 3 bosses. Then Wing 2 has another 3 bosses, and that opens up on the 25th of September. And then the final wing has 2 bosses and unlocks on the 9th of October. This will give you many shots at item level 340 gear, and of course, it's quite a bit easier than doing Mythic Dungeons. They might be a bit boring, but hey, it's more gear. Okay, so you've been running heroic dungeons, you've been doing your world quest, you've got enough gear to get yourself into LFR to clear that weekly. That's all good, but there are even more sources of gear to think about. First, world bosses. As with Legion, we will have weekly world bosses to kill in the regular zones of Battle for Azeroth. They will drop 355 baseline gear, so it's worth killing those as early as is possible. If you get lucky, that can really help to boost up your world quest rewards, as an example. There is, however, another world boss to talk about, though, the Warfront one. So when your faction has control of the Warfront, it will give you access to quests and world content in the Warfront zone. Now, that's world content such as the Warfront world boss. Now, these drop gear that has a tier 2 PvP appearance, and more importantly, is Azerite gear. So that covers some really high impact slots. So you want to pay attention to whenever your faction has control of the Warfront, and you want to be sure to run your characters through those world bosses. Next, though, we've got to talk about the Warfronts themselves, because you'll get a weekly quest that gives you 370 Warfront gear. Now, all that you need to do is complete the Warfront, and it's just a free bit of very powerful, heroic raid quality loot. So yeah, you want to do that, and it's likely one of the first things you should be doing every week once the Warfront is up. Now, the regular Warfront just runs, also can drop 340 gear. Grinding out Warfronts, though, isn't a great source of gear in comparison to others, but the weekly one absolutely is one of the best sources of gear for non-raiding players. Finally then, Mythic Plus. So gear from that operates similar to how it did in the past, with every 2 difficulty levels giving you +5 item level up to a cap of +10 keystone. Now, as always, you get loot based on your keystone level from the chest at the end, and then a bunch of loot that's 10 item levels higher than that from the weekly chest. And of course, the weekly chest has a higher Titanforge chance. Now, the only modification for BFA is that the weekly chest can contain Azerite gear, while the end of run chests cannot. Azerite gear does not Titan Forge, of course, so basically this means that completing Mythic Plus on the highest possible difficulty level is still a very good thing to do, especially because of the higher chance of weapons and Azerite gear. Then finally, the bonus roll vendor is back. You can, I believe, only get 2 rolls per week, down from 3, but I believe they have slightly better chances than before. Anyway, you'll want to use these, of course, on the hardest content that you can, or on a boss, as an example, if you're targeting a specific weapon, trinket, or piece of Azerite gear. So once you've done a bit of Mythic Plus, you've got your Warfront gear, you've done a few rounds of World Quests, you'll probably be between 340 and 350. That's about the time you can start doing normal Uldir. Of course, you want to do that with a guild if you can. Now, PvP gear, that's something that we haven't really covered yet, and it's a good bit different in BFA. So Conquest is now a bar on your UI that you can fill every week. Each time you fill that bar, you will get a bit of loot, and it starts off being around LFR quality, but that will increase in quality as you move through the sets. Then when you fill your Conquest bar, that will also get you a weekly chest that will contain a bit of loot that is based on the highest rating level PvP content that you've done in the previous week. So if you've got a friend or two, you can quickly knock out some arenas, and that could be a pretty valuable part of your strategy, especially because the first bit of Conquest gear is actually a 340 weapon. Past that, we still need to talk about crafted gear and reps. So the rep stuff's better than it was in Legion. However, the pacing of the unlocks does mean that, well, they're really just there for bad luck protection. Unless you're tremendously unlucky, you will have already outgeared those vendors by the time you hit Exalted. The only exception could be the Champions of Azeroth, who of course have a high item level Azerite bit of gear. Now, the crafted gear is quite powerful because you can easily craft the basic 355 version now. It uses Explosive and Hydro Cores, which the latter are from dungeons. Crafting the 355 one unlocks the recipe for the 371. Now, the 371 uses Sanguine cells. These drop from Uldir bosses. The 371 only requires 25 of them, so you should be able to get that quite quickly. Crafting it unlocks the 385 version, which costs 250 cells, and I believe that's a few weeks worth of Uldir raiding. But still, 385 is a really, really high item level. So there you go. Between those world quests, doing LFR, doing Mythic Plus, and of course essentially the free gear that you get from Warfronts, that is how you gear up a character in Battle for Azeroth. I don't anticipate any major changes until patch 8.1 drops, and that probably won't be for a few months because it hasn't even hit the PTR yet. But finally though, I just want to cover some tips and tricks. So you will want to focus your efforts on where they have the most impact. With Battle for Azeroth, that means Azerite gear, trinkets, and weapons. Especially with Mythic Plus, you should try to target gear. You want to find out, your stat weights, your secondary stat distribution. You want to find out what weapons and trinkets are best in slot. Then you want to find out what dungeons they drop from, and then you want to target those. Assuming you're going to Pug, then, it's easy for a tank or a healer to do that. But if you're a DPS spec, it might be a little bit harder. You probably won't have the luxury of being selective in the dungeons that you do. So, maybe instead you want to set up groups with your own key. So yeah, there's that. Now, before the end of the week, you want to push your key as far as you possibly can. Your weekly chest rewards, of course, are based off your highest key completed, even if you miss the timer. And this is your only non-raid source of really high item level Azerite gear, so it's imperative that you really shoot for that. Now, the weekly chest can give you between 1 and 3 items per week, and at 7+, it's a strongest heroic Uldir gear, and it's got a higher chance of Azerite and weapons, which means that it really, really is very important. I cannot emphasize enough how much it is worth doing that with the Mythic Plus. Then, of course, as usual, Azerite gear and weapons cannot Titan Forge. When it comes to pugging raids and things like that, ideally you do want to avoid it, but if you're looking for a pug, you want to choose maybe a guild run that's trying to fill 1 or 2 spots. That's generally how to get the smoothest run. And then I suppose finally, I want to caution about caring about iLvl too much, because often, the best gains are from playing better, not from an incremental gear upgrade. Sadly, Blizzard have made it such that item level is a very core part of the game now, and people kind of lose sight of what matters most, which is actually playing well. Now, it's hard to avoid the item level problem if you live in the pug world, but if you're in a guild, then you shouldn't really worry about some of this stuff too much. I think with modern WoW, like 90% of the gains can be had pretty quick, and the final 10% of gearing just takes a lot of time. So rather than just grinding out Mythic Plus until you can't take it anymore, just get decent weekly stuff and move on. As always, I make these guides that focus on efficiency so that the work parts of World of Warcraft are diminished, and I think that frees you up to enjoy the game more and actually put time into being more skilled at it, rather than feeling like you've got to go through a gear treadmill. So there you go. That is my thoughts on gearing up in Battle for Azeroth now that the full spectrum of content has released. Of course, a massive thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. A massive thank you to you for watching. And with all that said, I will see you next time.